Hello and welcome to Pods Above Replacement, part of the Padres Hot Tub Podcast Network. My name is Raphie Cantor. I am the producer of Padres Hot Tub, and joining me from the Mile High City, he just won the Austin Nola trade. It's John Precoda.
Hey there, Raphie. I knew I was going to win that trade. I knew it all along.
It was all part of the master scheme. Another Dipoto masterclass, as they say up north. Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm speaking for both of us here, but we've had an absolute joy doing this podcast and finding this audience, and we love interacting with you guys. So thank you once again. We hope you're watching this on YouTube because we put a lot of work into this edit. You know, John and I spend all week pulling stats and, scrambling through the depths of Baseball Savant, the baseball dark web, and pulling out all of this fine, tasty data for you. And we actually are having fun analyzing some of the data that you're providing us, which is how we choose the topic for this show. We've been putting up polls on our YouTube. Again, Padres Hot Tub on YouTube. You can go subscribe there. It's the only way you're going to guarantee yourself that you're going to see this poll. And in a landslide victory, truly landslide, the topic for this video was chosen, which was Austin Nola versus Luis Campusano, with an outright majority, 52% of voters wanting it. So we are going to give it to you in just a second. But first, of course, this show is brought to you by the Padres Hot Tub Podcast Network, which is powered by our Patreon supporters. You can go to patreon.com/Padres Hot Tub to join for as little as $5 a month. That'll get you on our Discord, where John and I live like cavemen in caves, crunching numbers and sweating and trying to quell the nerves of the nervous bunch on there. But we are having an absolute blast on our Pods Above Replacement channel, talking with all the fine folks who have joined us to discuss the show after dark. And we've got a good one for you. So, John, why don't you take us through what we'll be covering today?
All right, so what we're going to be talking about today is Austin Nola and Luis Campusano. Obviously, there's more information on Austin Nola, so our stats will be geared a little bit more towards him, but also towards what Campusano could possibly contribute as a conceivable replacement. We'll decide at the end of the episode whether he needs to be the replacement. So we're going to talk about each of their backstories, and then we're going to get into a little bit of advanced metrics for catching for the first time on this series. So we're going to be talking about framing runs. We're going to be talking about blocking runs. We're going to be talking about pop time, which will all be, new information. So we'll go through it, explain its value, and then talk about who they are at the plate, talk about who they are behind the plate, and make a decision on what we should do going forward.
Absolutely. So, and as you mentioned, of course, we're a little bit limited in our sample size here, especially when it comes to Luis Campusano. But there's still tons of interesting data that we have pulled that we're excited to share with y'all. But before we get to Mr. Campusano, let's, of course, talk about the Padres' primary catcher at the moment. His name is Austin Nola, of course. Born on December 28th, 1989. Don't quote me, but I think that's LeBron James' birthday. Two guys who could not be more similar. He was taken in the 2012 June amateur draft by the Miami Marlins as a fifth-round pick as an infielder, which we will get into in a second. He is currently in his first year of arbitration, which means he has two more ARB-eligible years after this, getting paid a whopping $2.35 million. He will be a free agent going into the 2026 MLB season, and he has two minor league options left, which isn't necessarily relevant for this conversation, but I always like to throw it in. Austin Nola, of course, the older brother of Aaron Nola, the ace for the Philadelphia Phillies. They were both inducted this offseason into the Louisiana Italian-American Sports Hall of Fame. I know that's an event that you were covering closely, John. I appreciate you being there representing Pods Above Replacement, a podcast that did not exist when that gala was occurring.
Too bad. Too bad.
I know. We would have been all over that one. Austin was there. Aaron couldn't attend. I debated if I wanted to include that, but I just thought that was really funny. They were both born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which I find both interesting because they're so close to Louisiana, to New Orleans, and their last name is Nola, but they weren't from Nola, so that must have been frustrating, or they got picked on a bunch as kids. I don't know. He played shortstop as a high schooler, went to LSU, good baseball school, to play shortstop, and actually fellow LSU Tiger DJ LeMahieu was moved off of shortstop to second base to make room for Austin Nola, which gives you an idea of how Nola was rated at the time as a defender. This was apparently a defensive thinking move, and it must have worked because they won the College World Series that year. So I find that both interesting, just because if you go back and look at some of those, turn of the decade 08, 09, 10, 11 SEC teams, they're pretty stacked with some talent. Austin Nola was drafted 3 times, actually, 3 separate occasions. He was drafted out of high school by the Rockies in the 28th round. Obviously elected to go play college ball. He was drafted in 2011 by the Blue Jays in the 31st round, but he stuck around at LSU to get a chance to play with his younger brother, Aaron, who came that following year. They're 3 years apart. So Austin was a senior when Aaron was a freshman. And then after that senior season, he was drafted in 2012 by the Marlins in the 5th round, like I said, signed for $75,000. And this is a fun fact I found doing some research for this. At one point, he was playing for one of the Marlins minor league affiliates, which was the New Orleans Zephyrs, and their jerseys at the time had Nola on the front. So he was wearing a jersey that said Nola on the front and Nola on the back in different fonts, which does tickle me. He played as an infielder until the end of 2016, but that's about when his career began to stall. And, he was hitting for average, but had no pop, basically. And he was feeling like his back was kind of up against the wall. He'd been a minor leaguer for 5 years, and he wasn't really going anywhere. And so the hitting coach at the time for the Zephyrs, his name was Paul Phillips, suggested that he try and transition to catcher. And to Austin's credit, he went all the way back to the Arizona Fall League and worked his way back up through the system as a catcher. He was ultimately let go by the Marlins and signed by the Mariners as a minor league free agent in 2018. And he did make his major league debut in 2019, which, if you're keeping score at home, means he was almost 30 years old when he made his major league debut. So in a couple of seasons for the Mariners, actually not even a couple seasons, a half season in 2019 and like a month in 2020, he had a really strong start. He had a WRC plus of 114 in 2019, and in that very small time in 2020 with the Mariners, he had a WRC plus of 148. So again, he's hitting like Manny Machado in that month. And so while that was happening up in Seattle, down in the executive suite at Petco Park, AJ Preller was watching with a raging heart on, apparently, because he was looking at his catching position below, which at the time was being manned by Austin Hedges, Francisco Mejia, and Luis Torrens, lots of old friends at the time. And, the catching position was a black hole. It kind of feels like that defense against the dark arts teacher spot in the Padres lineup, where you just, no matter who you cycle in, something happens to them and they don't end up producing. And John, he then goes on to make one of the more, I'll say, controversial trades of his tenure.
Controversial trades? All I hear is Tevin from the Discord saying, "This is the worst trade of all time. One of the worst trades the GM's ever made." So the trade. We gave up. I mean, at the time, obviously, we're more knowledgeable about our players. So the news was kind of trickling out that we were going after catchers. It came out who we were trading. We were trading Ty France, Andres Munoz, who was hurt at the time, Taylor Trammell, and Luis Torrens. And so that was one of our, top prospects at the time. And then in Taylor Trammell, and then Ty France, who didn't really have a position because he was blocked by one of the best first basemen of all time, is what people will tell you on our Discord. No, they won't tell you that on our Discord. Our Discord's too smart. But it basically made it so that Ty France was either out of position or supplanting Eric Hosmer, and so there really wasn't a spot for him at the
God
time.
forbid we
I
supplant
guess.
Eric Hosmer.
I know, God forbid. It honestly would have been just so much better if at that point he took over at first base, Ty France did. But anyways, whatever. So it comes out who we're getting, and that's when every Padres fan in the world started Googling who is Austin Nola, because we got Austin Nola, we got Austin Adams, we doubled up the Austins, and then we got Dan Altavilla as well. And since that time, the Mariners have received a total of 8.7 F4 in that trade, 8.7, largely by Ty France's 6.7 F4, and then Andres Munoz has also put up 2 F4, and that's most of it. Austin Nola in that time has gotten 1.4 F4, and then Austin Adams and Dan Altavilla put up a total of 0.4 F4, while Austin Adams was hitting 10 million batters, and Dan Altavilla was just getting pictures of his ass put on Twitter every 2 minutes. So
to be fair, it was a legendary ass. Dump Truck Dan will forever live in my heart.
Dump Truck Dan. So overall, since that trade, according to F4, we're down about 7 total F4 in that trade, and it was just funny at the time because, like I said, everybody was Googling who was Austin Nola, and baseball trade values, who everybody loves to reference when they're making their little trade propositions at the deadline, saw the trade come out, and they declined it for the Padres would never accept this trade according to them, and that's because they valued the total that we were giving away as worth $45.7 million, which already they kind of surpassed the $45.7 million in terms of value just from Ty France and Andres Munoz, how much F4 they've put in, and how cheap their contracts have been while they put in that F4. But anyways, they predicted $45.7 million, and then they projected coming back to us was $9.6 million, which is a $35 million difference in terms of value. And at the time, they had Austin Nola as worth a couple million, and they didn't really know who he was, I feel like, because that off season, they suddenly increased his value by about $20 million after he was average for us at best. Just kind of shows what goes into that little baseball trade values, those little metrics. I think they're kind of changing things on the fly. But either way, Jeff Passan also came out with a tweet at the time that says that several analytically inclined teams, which is not how I would describe us, certainly in 2020, but even right now, maybe not so much, were liking Austin Nola and what he could contribute, and therefore were going after him. And so we won that battle by giving up quite a lot. And that's probably why he was so expensive in the first place, is because we weren't the only team going after him. But why was he so valuable at the time? I mean, one, he was a catcher, which any catcher that can play solid defense and hit even at all is valuable. And not only that, but he had stats that were, they were pretty, they're positive. They had a good chance of, having success going forward if he continued hitting at the plate as he was hitting. And he was 30 years old and just starting, or pre-ARB at the time, so not even in the ARB system. And that means that we're getting his prime years, or maybe even post-prime years, but whatever, prime adjacent years at basically the MLB minimum, or even still now, we're only paying him $2.5 million. And Jake Cronenworth was kind of a similar model. He was a little bit younger at the time, but we were coming off a successful, late 20s player who was going to give us his prime years for cheap. I could see why Preller might want to, dabble into that little realm again to try to get a player in his prime for cheap for a long time. It's probably what made him end up paying the expense that was required in order to get him. And the batting stats that I say were valuable from him were predominantly based on his hard hit percentage, and then also given his hard hit percentage, he had a good launch angle, and ex-WOBA and WOBA both just loved his numbers his first couple years in 2019 and 2020. He had a 337 WOBA in 2019, and then a 352 WOBA in that short 2020 season, and he was having great batted ball contact. And even now, he's continued to kind of have similar numbers. Maybe not good expected WOBA numbers, but high hard hit percentages with a good launch angle. And so going through this episode, researching him, I, to be honest, expected him to have a relatively low hard hit percentage because, I mean, you've seen what I've seen, and it doesn't seem like when he gets a hold of a ball, it goes out of the park very often. Not only that, but he doesn't hit any barrels at all, ever. So looking up hard hit percentage from 2021, 2022, and 2023, the last 3 years, he is third on the team in hard hit percentage. And just so everybody knows, hard hit percentage is percentage of the balls hit at 95 miles per hour or greater in terms of exit velocity. Third on the team behind Manny and Tatis. It goes Manny, Tatis, Austin, Nola in hard hit percentage.
Wait, what?
And then Manny, Tatis, Nola. Those are names that we always put together in our heads, I think. So well above Trent Grisham, well above Jake Cronenworth, Will Myers, Tommy Pham, Jerkson Profort. None of them are even close. So it's Manny, Tatis, Nola, then everybody else, as one would expect. So he's hitting the third most hard hit balls. Why the heck does he never hit home runs, and why does he have no barrels? And so that's what I'm trying to figure out for this episode, right? And so then I say, well, maybe he has a terrible launch angle. Maybe he has Eric Hosmer disease, where he's smashing balls into the ground. And it turns out, no, his launch angle's fine. It's, above major league average. So he's hitting the ball hard, and he's hitting it with launch angle. How is that possible? Just statistically, if you're hitting the ball hard with a good launch angle, you're going to have barrels, you're going to have homers, right? So I dug into it more, and it turns out that he does have a good launch angle, but it's split based on how hard he's hitting the ball. So when Austin Nola hits a ball above 95 miles per hour, which is quite often, he is second to last over the past 3 years on our roster in terms of launch angle on those balls, behind only Eric Hosmer. So while Tatis, when he's hitting the ball, he's hitting it with launch angle. So he is first on the team with 17-degree launch angle while also hitting a million hard hit balls. Nola, whenever he hits that hard hit ball, it's on the ground every time. And just the inverse of that is true as well. When he hits it below 95 miles an hour, a pitch that is very unlikely to end up being a home run, that's when he has launch angle. So he's third on the team on launch angle on balls hit below 95 miles per hour. And so if you're hitting the ball hard on the ground and hitting the ball soft in the air, that's a perfect manner in which to never be successful at the plate, right? Balls on the ground, who cares if they're hit hard? Players have a bunch of chances to get to the ball in time, right? And yes, some will sneak through, but that's not the optimal way to hit a ball hard. So, like I said, it turns out that he has no barrels. From 2021 to 2023, he has had 8 barrels. 8. So to put that in context, I came up with a little quiz for you. So Nola, in these 3 years, has had 634 balls in play that weren't bunts.
Okay.
So no bunts, just balls hit in play. 634 of them. He's had 8 barrels. I'm going to name for you a player, and you tell me whether that player has had more barrels as a San Diego Padre or fewer barrels as a San Diego Padre.
Is this on a rate basis or just cumulative?
Total amount. So I'm going to give you the total amount that they've put in play, just as a reference, so that you can say,
yeah,
this is how he compares to Nola and how many barrels does he have. Okay.
So
like I said, 634 in play by Nola, 8 barrels. Victor Carantini, he had 317, exactly 1/2 as many balls put in play as Austin Nola. Did he have more barrels or fewer barrels?
I'm gonna go. I remember sending a lot of emojis with a carrot and a martini to friends when he was here, so I'm gonna go with more.
He does have more. He has twice as many barrels as a San Diego Padres, Austin Nola.
Okay.
He had 16 barrels in half as many balls put in play besides bunts. So
Okay.
half as much, twice as many. All right. Let's go with Brandon Drury. He had 170 balls put in play as a San Diego Padre. Did he have more barrels or fewer barrels than Austin Nola?
Dear God. If you blinked, you might have missed Brandon Drury on the Padres.
It's true.
I'm going to zag and say less.
He had 11 barrels. So he had 3.73 times fewer at bats as a Padre than Nola, and 3 more barrels. All right. Basically the same player, Josh Bell, who struggled as a Padre, had very few at bats, 177 balls put in play, and struggled. Remember, he was performing poorly and everybody was mad at him. Does he have more barrels or fewer barrels?
I'm going to say Nola? I'm hoping my pattern recognition skills are paying off here, and I'm going to say that he had more barrels.
He tied with Austin Nola with 8 barrels.
Okay.
Everybody was so mad at him because every time he'd hit the ball, it'd be on the ground, right? I feel like everybody remembers that from the end of last year. Josh Bell, every time he smoked it, it'd be on the ground. He has as many barrels as Austin Nola in Austin Nola's career besides 2020, the last 3 years as a Padre. All right, last one. With 108 balls put in play, which is 5.9 times fewer than Austin Nola, does Luis Campusano have more or fewer barrels than Austin Nola?
$108 balls in play. I'm going to say... Can I say that they're tied again? Tied?
Sure.
They're tied.
Is that your guess?
That's my guess.
He has fewer. We finally found one with fewer. He has 3 fewer. He has 5 in only 108 balls put in play. So about 6 times fewer. He has 3. He might catch that up by the end of the week. Well, you never know. So all that amounts to Nola having a ISO in the past 2 years of 0.087, which is remarkably bad. It's isolated power over the last 2 years, 10th worst among players with at least 500 plate appearances since the start of 2021. And just to say what isolated power is it's slugging percentage minus your batting average, and the thought process there is how often are they getting extra base hits in general. So obviously he's not hitting a lot of homers. Obviously, he doesn't hit a lot of doubles. Obviously not a lot of triples. So either way, he's 10th worst in the past 2 years at isolated power, just basically meaning he doesn't have a lot of power. And as a Padre in general, he has put up 1.4 WAR with an 86 WRC plus, so 14 points below average, which honestly isn't terrible for a catcher. That's about where a catcher normally is. It's just that we thought that we were trading for somebody who is not a typical catcher at the plate. So you were going to talk about Luis Campusano next?
And just to put a number on it, like the league-wide OPS plus in 2022 for catchers was 88. So he was basically league average, as catcher. But like you said, it's just not the goods that we thought we were getting when we made that trade. So again, his platoon mate there, Luis Campusano, born on September 29th, 1998. So he is 24 years old currently. He was our second round pick in the 2017 draft. So the 39th overall pick, very, very highly touted. He's on his league minimum rookie contract. He doesn't even have a full year of service time yet, which I thought was interesting because he's had come up and had so many cups of coffee over the past few years, but still hasn't accrued a year of service time. He is going to be a free agent not until the 2029 MLB season. So he will be a Padre for a long while, assuming he is not sent elsewhere. And he has 1 minor league option left. So if he is sent down during the 2023 season, that would be it for Luis Campusano, going back and forth between the minors. So, again, the thing about Campusano is that he doesn't have a huge track record in Major League Baseball, a handful of plate appearances across several seasons, COVID and everything like that. So I thought it would be better to just look at Campy's final prospect report that Fangraphs published at the end of 2022 to kind of frame the discussion around him, because that's kind of the best information that we're going off of. Because also he spent the last 2 seasons in AAA, which I can go into his numbers, which were fantastic. But it's AAA, it's El Paso, it's like playing on the moon. He had like a over 800 OPS both seasons, and it's still only good for a 121 WRC plus in 2021 and in 2022 a 110 WRC plus, which just shows you what the offensive environment is like in those leagues. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about those numbers because, again, Austin Hedges looked like a world slayer in El Paso, so it's just not worth our time. But in Fangraph's 2022 prospect report, he was ranked as the team's second overall prospect, and he was given a 55 overall future value ranking, which is really high. In that same report, there were 4 other players who got 55 future value rankings. They were Jeremy Pena, MJ Melendez, Hunter Green, and George Kirby. Okay, those are like 4 big leaguers, like bona fide big leaguers. So they are really high at Fangraphs on Luis Campusano as a catcher. And so this is what they said about him. Campusano graduated from rookiedom as an injury fill-in rather than because the Padres handed him the keys to the job. Rule of thumb, take the long view on raw catchers with premium offensive ability. Campusano is just that. And they go on to say, quote, while he has more risk than is typical for a prospect who has performed to this level at AAA, Campusano has rare offensive ability for the catcher position and an all-star ceiling if some of his ills are cured with continued adjustment in the big leagues. The headline trait here is Campusano's plus bat speed, which enables him to hit some epic pull-side homers and give him 25 home run potential. While when he connects with a full effort cut, he has the look of Wilson Contreras, who has performed like a 55 grade player to this point. An overly aggressive, pull-heavy approach leaves Campusano vulnerable to well-located breaking balls, which he tends to swing inside, end quote. And they go on to talk about, some of his ills, which are poor plate discipline, which I know you'll get to in a second, John. And also specifically on the defensive side, when he's receiving pitches, he moved down to one knee when he was in the minor leagues. And while that was really good for his framing ability because he was more stable and he was able to kind of just pull in those shadow pitches into the zone, it's poor for blocking because if thinking about a ball that bounces in the dirt, you're going to be a lot more agile if you're up on your feet rather than down on one knee to get in front of that ball. So that was a concern that they had. So without further ado, John, why don't you go into some of those numbers at the plate?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It correlates almost perfectly with what I was going to say. As you said, an overly aggressive, pull-heavy approach leaves Campusano vulnerable to well-located breaking balls, which he tends to swing inside. So he's only had 396 pitches that he's seen as a major league player, which makes his overall profile a little bit hard to digest because it's such a small sample size. But he has shown early on that he chases pitches far too often. He, thus far, is at a 41.4% chase rate, which is much higher than the league average of 28.4. And he just swings in general a lot. 55% when the league swings under 50%, so 47% is league average. He's swinging at 55.8. He's swinging at first pitches 40% of the time when the league average is under 30. Basically, just up there to swing, right? And it makes... and there's a good reason for him to go up there and swing. He has a lot of power, and he has a lot of this pull side power especially. But it makes him vulnerable to the breaking ball. Just like it says in this little report, he has continuously put up much poorer numbers against specifically sliders and curveballs while kind of mashing fastballs and changeups. I mean, don't want to put exact numbers to it, but because it's such a small sample size, but it's just basically there's a huge gap between how he's performing against fastballs and changeups and how he's performing against breaking balls. And I think that there's a little bit of cause for concern there when you're facing a major league team with major league scouting reports, players that aren't working on anything in particular, but rather just trying to get you out all the time. He's probably going to face more breaking balls in general. And when you have that high chase rate and an inability to hit a slider and a curveball, I have a feeling that he's going to get a high dose of sliders and curveballs until he can prove that he can lay off of them. at least. Even if he can't hit them, he can lay off of them. And thus far, he chases a lot, especially on fastball. I mean, especially on sliders off the plate.
Yeah, I think that just goes back to what the scouting report at Fangraphs said, which is, you got to take the long view on these guys. He's going to come up to the major leagues. He's going to have to make adjustments. Just from a pure physics standpoint, when you're playing at El Paso with 4,000 feet elevation, you're not going to have pitches breaking as much up there. So when you come down to playing at sea level and you're facing much higher talent who are going to be able to move the ball more with their arm action, it's just a different level, and it's just going to take time, and reps are going to fix, I think, some of these ills. So with that being said, let's move on to the defensive side of things, and we're going to talk now about catcher advanced metrics. So there are 3 key stats that we're going to be talking about here, and in the context of Campusano and Nola, I'm kind of want to break them down to kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so for the good, we'll start there. We're going to talk about blocking runs. So again, blocking runs are, you think of a ball in the dirt when runners are on base, putting your body in front of it and blocking it to make sure it doesn't become a passed ball or a wild pitch. So blocking runs works in a very similar manner to outs above average. And at the fielding runs, defensive runs saved metric that StatCast uses on outs above average. Sorry, DRS is a different stat. I shouldn't mix these up. Runs prevented. I'm sorry, that's what I was looking for. Runs prevented and outs above average are correlated. And so blocking runs kind of works in a similar way, where it's cumulative. So, and everything's done based on a probabilistic standpoint. So if there's a 10% chance that a ball is blocked because it's a really wicked pitch in the dirt, and StatCast doesn't think that the catcher has a good chance of blocking it, and they do block it, then they're rewarded with 0.9 framing runs blocking runs. We're going to mix those up a little bit. And same thing happens. If you don't block it, then you're punished commiserate with how easy or difficult the pitch is to get in front of. So again, I wanted to start with the good, which is that Austin Nola, in a very limited sample set in 2023 so far, has been really good at blocking pitches. He has 4 blocking runs above average, which was tied for first in the league right now. But that's consistent on a rate basis too. He's still very good. He's had a lot of opportunities. He's had, I think, the second most blocked pitch opportunities in Major League Baseball so far, which means that there's just been a lot of balls in the dirt with runners on base so far, which I wouldn't read too far into, this early in the season. But it might be a little bit of noise, to be completely honest, just because in 2021 and 2022, when he had over 5,000 opportunities, so obviously a huge sample size there, he had cumulatively only 1 blocking run above average. So, I don't really know what to make of 2023 so far, but up until this season, he's been about a league average blocker, which there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being a league average blocker, being right in the middle. It's just, what are you providing in the other aspects of your game? Campusano, like we said, small sample size, but he's been mostly fine. He's had combined in his career something like a little over 1,000 blocking opportunities, and he's had 4 blocking runs above average in that time. So, on a rate basis, he's actually the best at blocking so far of any catchers who have played for the Padres in the last 3 seasons. Webster Rivas is second, if you were curious. So, I think, I know, on a rate basis. So, they not a lot of opportunities there, but good for Webster Rivas. So, in the blocking department, this one aspect of the defensive game, the Padres are actually okay. This isn't something that we really need to worry about too much. We're not, worried about balls getting passed to the backstop too much. So before I move on to framing, is there anything you wanted to talk about with blocking, John?
No, not in particular. But even on a non-rate basis, Webster Rivas still only has 2 fewer blocks above average than Austin Nola. I don't even remember him playing. I remember maybe we played against the Astros one time, I think.
Yes, he did. That's a really good memory. He did. He came up like a shocking amount. If you go back, you're like, guys, what are we doing? Yeah. I mean, he was shuttling back and forth a lot. Because if you'll remember, we didn't really talk about this a lot. Austin Nola was hurt quite a bit when he first got here. And so he was kind of, shuttling back and forth during those times. Okay. Now let's talk about framing. So this is the bad and the good, the bad, and the ugly. So catcher framing, for those who don't know, the StatCast divides the strike zone into 4 different zones. There's the heart of the plate, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's right around the middle, right down the middle. There's the shadow, which is defined as, I wish I had a baseball like Mark Grant does during the broadcast to hold, but I don't. So I'm looking for something that's baseball shaped. I have hand sanitizer. This is what we're going to go with. So basically the shadow is 1 baseball length inside the strike zone and 1 baseball length outside the strike zone. And that's the money of where framing really happens. If you think about, those balls that are just kind of like stuck by the glove, maybe pulled back in a little bit, fool the umpire. Oh my God, the umpires are terrible, blah, 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 blah. That's all the art of framing. There's also chase and waste are the other 2, but we're not going to go into those for now. Shadow is what we need to think about. That is the basis for which StatCast measures catcher framing. So the important thing to know about catcher framing is that it's kind of the whole, like, I don't want to say the whole ball game when it comes to catching these days, but until we get a robot strike zone, like, this is where a lot of defensive value is derived from catchers. And I want to go to an old friend to illustrate this point. I'm sorry, I must invoke his name. But Austin Hedges provides a great example of what catchers bring to baseball and to defensive statistics with framing. So this is why Austin Hedges had a starting job for so long. Over the course of his Padre career, he had 38 catcher framing runs. So that's from 2015 through 2019. And just to illustrate how valuable that is, his 3 best seasons were some of the darkest in Padres memory, 2017, 2018, and 2019. He, in those seasons, had WRC pluses of 69, 90, and 48. Okay, so he's just as
What's
bad.
Madison Bumgarner's career WRC plus? It's got to be around 48.
It's got to be somewhere around there. And yet, during that time, Fangraphs said he was worth 5.6 F4 in those 3 seasons. Okay, because Fangraphs WAR takes into account catcher framing runs. To put that in perspective,
I'm getting bad flashbacks of the Mejia versus Hedges.
Yeah,
arguments.
I know.
They're all coming back.
We're just in purgatory, John. We're just having the same catch debate over and over again. To put that in perspective, so like I said, Austin Hedges during those 3 seasons, 2017 through 2019, he was worth 5.6 F4. Nola has only put up 3.9 F4 in his entire major league career. That includes all the good years he was in Seattle. Okay, so Austin Hedges is considerably. I know they start to blend. Austin Hedges was considerably more valuable in those 3 years than Nola has been in his entire career. Okay. So on the other hand, Austin Nola has been a career average to below average framer. And he was basically like, 1 or 2 runs on either side of average for his entire career until last season, 2022. In 2022, he had negative 9.5 catcher framing runs, which was the 3rd worst in baseball. And I just wanted to illustrate this again to hammer in how important framing is. Fangraphs last year calculated runs per win to be equal to 9.524. So it could be argued that over 2022, Austin Nola's framing alone cost the Padres a win. If you had a league average framer in there, it potentially would have meant that the Padres were a 90-win team last year. Okay. This year is not even worth getting into because, it's small sample size. And unfortunately, Luis Campusano's career is also not really worth getting into because he's had the same amount of opportunities his entire career as Austin Nola has had this season. So it's not really a discussion that's worth having. For what it's worth, he's been exactly average because he's had no opportunities. But this is where we're starting to get into where Austin Nola suffers behind the plate. John, is there anything you want to add on framing before we keep moving on?
No, but I did look it up. Madison Bumgarner has a career 44 WRC plus at the plate.
Oh,
and Austin Hedges, as you said, had the 48 that one year and has a 54 WRC plus for his career at the plate. Basically the same as Madison Bumgarner.
Wow. Okay. I'm so glad we don't have to deal with that anymore. Look, I know I just made this whole argument for like why it's valuable, but like Jesus Christ, it was so cool to watch. Okay.
Some of it's got to be entertainment, right? And that is not entertaining.
It is not entertainment. Yeah. So again, just thinking about to kind of recap framing, balls in the shadow zone, 1 inch inside and 1 inch, or 1 ball length inside and 1 ball length outside of the strike zone. That is what constitutes these numbers. So finally, the ugly pop time. This is the thing that I know just colloquially eye test Padres fans gripe about with Austin Nola the most, because it's so visceral seeing runners, take off on him and challenge him so directly. So I wanted to define what pop time is, according to Major League Baseball, before we start talking about the numbers. So they said, quote, on steal or pickoff attempts by a catcher, pop time represents the time elapsed from the moment the pitch hits the catcher's mitt to the moment the intended fielder is projected to receive his throw at the center of the base. So the center of the base thing, it's just to standardize everything, because obviously throws are being caught at different points based on how tall people are, what their wingspan are, where the throw is located, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So just to normalize it, they're like, when do we think this throw is going to get to the center of the base? So 2022, Austin Nola had the 6th worst pop time of qualified catchers at 2.01. When you go down to look at his stolen base, caught stealing numbers, it's not super inspiring. In 2021, there were 30 stolen base attempts against him and 26 successes, so only 4 caught stealing. That is a 86.67% success rate that runners had stealing bases against Austin Nola, or, the converse of that, 13.3% caught stealing. The league average was 24% that year, caught stealing. So, almost double what Austin Nola had. In 2022, I think last year too, really, is when we really started to see teams take note and challenge Austin Nola. And this was, again, before any of the rules which now encourage base running in a depressed offensive environment, that we were still seeing these numbers. So last year, on 64 attempts, runners were successful 56% of the time, 87.5% success rate, a 12.5% caught stealing rate. The league average is 25%. So again, exactly half of the league average success rate for Austin Nola. We're kind of seeing that trend really come back to bite him so far this year. And John, I know you're going to talk about this in a second, but just to put it in perspective, in 2023, he has already been faced 21 steal attempts. So, in 2021, he faced 30 the entire year. And we're in the middle of April when we're recording this, and he's had 21 attempts against him already. And of those 21 attempts, he's only caught 2 people. So a 90% success rate, a 9.6% caught stealing rate, and league average so far, which again we should know, is 19% caught stealing. So much lower than the 24 and 25% in the previous years. But still, Nola's at about half the league average success. So, John, I know you have a theory about what's going to govern the run game.
So based on those numbers you just gave us, if he catches 130 games, there's going to be 210 stolen base attempts against.
Jesus.
That's a lot of stolen. Yeah, so I mean, and this plays into my argument, which is that I don't really think, I know we always hammer on caught stealing percentage, and maybe at the outliers that makes sense, because if you're throwing out 0% of players, then they're going to want to steal every time, right? But I've heard that front offices kind of look at stolen base attempts as a math equation. And it's a pretty easy equation. It's not as difficult as a player coming to the plate. It's much more simple. I don't know exactly which variables you want to put into it in any given situation, but I would imagine kind of the staples would be the given pitcher's speed to the plate, the catcher pop time, and then whether the the runner on first base is able to surpass those combined times 75% of the time or more. And there might be other factors that you take into account. There might be the quality of the pitcher's pickoff move. There might be the count at which the player might want to steal. And those are all conceivable options. But if it were me and I were running a team and I had this data, I would probably separate it into individual players as part of their game plan for a given day. And so, Raphie, you're gonna be playing baseball today, and
great.
Let's say Yu Darvish is on the mound and Austin Nola's behind the plate. So Yu Darvish plus Austin Nola gives you X amount of total time to steal a base. I can put this into my system and say, 5 of my players in my starting lineup are very likely to get a stolen base 75% of the time or more against this combination of players, this battery. So I'm just going to go to you before the game and say, hey, you're one of the 5 players with a green light today. Go ahead and steal whenever you think that the opportunity is right. And here's how it changes depending on the catcher, because you can say, it doesn't matter that Austin Nola has no arm. What matters is that the pitchers aren't holding people on. And that argument doesn't make any sense. It's both, obviously, right? Both contribute to the math equation. There's the pitcher and the catcher. And so, we probably need to speed up our pitcher's time to the plate, but pitchers are variable. There's a bunch of pitchers. There's only one catcher at any given time. And so he is a very strong part of that total equation. And it might be that we have Austin Nola behind the plate with Yu Darvish, and 5 players are able to steal on a given day. But if you have Darvish and Campusano, suddenly the math is such that I can only give 3 players the green light for that given day. And to be honest, the caught stealing percentages, if I'm doing my math properly, might be basically the same. Austin Nola might catch the same amount of players trying to steal as Campusano, but more total players are going to be trying to steal against Austin Nola, and therefore providing more value to their team overall. And so when you put up these numbers that say how often Nola's catching players trying to steal, okay, that's an interesting stat, but in reality, the important part to me is, who is he preventing from trying to steal in the first place? And the answer seems to be nobody, or at least very, very few players relative to other catchers. If he's given up 21 attempts in 13 games when this math equation is starting to take precedent, that means that everybody knows that you can steal on him, right? And so we can go into, I don't know how you want to go with that. Do you want to go into which pitchers align with which catchers and how to discuss that? Or would you rather just say, okay, the math says that probably Austin Nola makes more pitchers more likely to be stolen upon?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can just talk a little bit about Padres pitchers kind of not really holding runners on. Just to put some numbers to it, last season, there were in the top 35 of pitchers that were stolen against. So giving up the most stolen base, allowing the most stolen bases. The Padres had 3 starting pitchers in that top 35. So Darvish had 14 stolen bases against. Clevenger had 13 stolen bases against, and Snell had 11 stolen bases against. And there's a little bit of a coincidence there, John, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, so I also wanted to talk about one of the main arguments that comes up in support of Austin Nola is how great he is with the staff, right? And one of the main stats that's often bandied about is catcher's ERA. And last year, Austin Nola had by far the best catcher's ERA for the Padres. He had a 3.38 catcher's ERA, which is just the ERA while he was catching. Jorge Alfaro was nearly 0.8 runs above that at 4.12 catcher's ERA. And so that's the stat, and you throw it out there and you say, well, clearly Austin Nola knows how to get in sync with his pitchers and makes it so that they give up less runs because he's on the same page, and whatever you want to say. But in reality, Austin Nola caught different pitchers than Jorge Alfaro. Austin Nola caught Yu Darvish every single time Yu Darvish went up on the mound. That's our best pitcher last year. He also caught Joe Musgrove predominantly in the beginning of the season and Blake Snell predominantly in the beginning of the season. While at that time, Jorge Alfaro's battery mates were Sean Manaea, Nick Martinez while he was in the rotation early on in the season, and then Mackenzie Gore, who was a rookie. And then he also, as you know, Gore got traded and Martinez went to the bullpen, picked up all the spot starts. So he caught for Reese Kinnear, caught for Ryan Weathers, and suddenly you're saying, okay, yeah, he might have had almost 0.8 runs more than Austin Nola, but he also never got to catch Darvish. He never got to catch Joe Musgrove, or at least very seldom did. Of course he's going to have a higher catcher's ERA. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. And just to kind of like go back into how pitchers could be influencing the run game, I wanted to look at some comparable catchers in terms of pop time and, you know, arm strength and exchange for Austin Nola to try and see, is this really his fault or are there other variables in play here? So, you know, his exchange time. So again, that's the time from when you catch the pitch to the time that the ball is actually being released when you throw it over, was 0.75 seconds in 2022. That was 25th out of 43 catchers. So it's you know, below the middle, but it's still kind of in the middle of the pack. His arm strength was 20th out of 43. So just a little bit above. So, you know, you kind of put those two factors together and you're like, okay, this dude's kind of in the middle of where qualified catchers are. So, you know, what else is going on here? So I was trying to rack my brain and be like, what else could be going on? Like if he's kind of in the middle of the pack, like, you know, why is he having so much trouble throwing runners out? So I was like, okay, maybe he's making throwing errors. You know, maybe that's it. He's putting balls into center field when he's trying to throw guys out at second base. But he had 4 throwing errors in 2022. Okay. Which against that many, you know, attempts is not anything crazy. And I wanted to look at some comparable catchers there. So 2 other catchers who had about the same amount of innings as Austin Nola, who also had 4 throwing errors, were Cal Raleigh and Keibert Ruiz. And, you know, their exchange and arm stats are also very similar to Austin Nola. Cal Raleigh has a much faster arm, but he has a slower exchange than Austin Nola. But Cal Raleigh had a 32% caught stealing rate on 78 attempts. Keibert Ruiz, who has a slower arm than Austin Nola somehow, and a faster exchange, had a 28.2% caught stealing rate on 71 attempts. So it's kind of just going back to what you were saying, John, about like Austin Nola is a piece of the puzzle. He's the biggest piece of the puzzle. Like he's the most consistent piece of the puzzle. I definitely think that these numbers indicate that people are going to continue to challenge him because, you know, he's putting his pitchers at a disadvantage by having a low pop time. But, you know, as we discussed, I think that there are also some contributing factors like outside of Ryan Weathers, not many Padres pitchers seem to be that devoted to holding runners on. And, you know, even the ones that were are now being nerfed by the disengagement rule, which is encouraging all this running in the first place. So I think, you know, with that combination of these new factors, it's really going to bring into question how much of a weakness Austin Nola's arm is as we go forward. Just before we kind of wrap this up, you know, I just wanted to mention Luis Campusano's pop time. He's had 4 attempts in his entire career. You know, which is again just kind of goes into how little he's actually played. So I don't want to like spend a lot of time on it because it's like these can be entirely be aberrations. But his pop time has ranged from 1.89 to 1.92 on those 4 attempts, which is about in line with Sean Murphy and Martin Maldonado, who are among the league leaders in pop time. So, I'm hoping that holds. I don't think that means that Luis Campusano's a god. I know it was a strength in his game in the minors, but we'll see as that develops and he gets more playing time. So that kind of brings us to the summary, the final act of this show, John, and it is a question of what do we do? We can't really do our normal fuck, marry, kill that we always enjoy doing at the end of these episodes because we're talking about two guys and this catching position's a little more locked in certain aspects. So I'll toss it over to you first. What are the questions we should be asking and what should the Padres action plan be?
So, okay, yeah, I definitely want to get into that, but just before, you were the one on our little document that posted the total pop times, and like you said, Austin Nola was the 6th worst overall in total pop time. So I looked at the list. I was like, who is worse at pop time than Austin Nola? So I looked at the list. Number one being the worst is Kevin Plawecki, who I know is not in the majors right now because I follow what he does. His wife is a fellow Granite Hills graduated in the same year, was on the women's soccer team while I was on the men's soccer team. So I always check in to see what he's doing. And he was the worst last year. And what do you know? Now he's in AAA. Second worst was Grandal, and he's known for framing more than anything, and his bat really carries him. Everybody else who's worse than Austin Nola hasn't been catching or is in AAA. So Pipierski, who I don't even know who that is, was 3rd on the list. He's in AAA. Robinson Chirinos hasn't been signed. Max Stacy hasn't been playing catcher. So basically, him and Grandal are the only ones who are actually sticking behind the plate as stolen bases have gone through the roof. It'll be interesting to see how stubborn we are to try to
really makes you think, John.
If everybody else isn't even playing,
it really makes you think. I'll kick it back over to you about. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. What question should we be asking and what should we be doing?
Yeah, the question I think that we are initially asking is, it's a new era, right? There's stolen bases at a rate that just there weren't in the past. So the mathematics are different. And it'll require a sample size. We'll have to, work on whatever our times are but there's no pitcher who is going to have, or there are very few pitchers who are going to have good enough times to home plate to make Austin Nola's total pop time not such that you would want to steal against in the modern game. So even if we teach everybody to be a little bit quicker to the plate, there's still going to be a lot of steals and very few caught stealing, unless we specifically sign pitchers so that they're quick to the plate or something along those lines to keep Austin Nola behind the plate, which I think is how we want to construct our roster around Austin Nola's weak arm. So that's question number one is 21 steal attempts in 13 games is just not sustainable, right? You can't have people stealing 200 plus times against you in a year with you throwing out none of them because everybody has a green light. So the first question is this even a question worth having? Is he even a catcher? Is the first question. Because if he can't control the run game to the extent that he cannot control the run game right now, then he's not a catcher.
Yeah.
He, at best, is a emergency backup against teams who don't steal once all this data comes out, right? Because right now it looks like some teams are a little bit more conservative, some teams are a little bit more liberal on the bases, but after enough data comes out, it's going to be a math equation, and everybody's going to steal who is able to steal. And that might be a lot of folks against Austin Nola. So that's the first question is he even a catcher to me? To me, that's my first question. And I really think, I don't know yet. We have to see how these are playing out because right now it's not sustainable. If it continues in this manner, then I don't even think he's a catcher. So I can't even argue whether he's a starting catcher or a backup catcher. I don't think he's a catcher. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, okay, are we focusing instead of his pop time, are we focusing more on how our pitchers are getting to the plate? Probably. I think in certain situations, definitely. I think that kind of depends on where you are in a given lineup. a stolen base tends to be more valuable in like the 6th or 7th spot in a lineup, just because the 7th, 8th, and 9th hitters are much less likely to hit a home run, and therefore a stolen base is more likely to end up in a run based on a base hit by players who are less likely to hit doubles or triples or home runs. So part of that, I think, is situation dependent. I wouldn't want Darvish focusing on the runner at first while Freddie Freeman is up, for example. So I'm kind of okay with Mookie Betts attempting to steal. That's fine. But I do think it will be situational, and depending on the team that you're playing and depending on the batters that are, coming up. But I guess everybody's probably working on that right now. It sounds like that's what Bo Mel has been working on. But given that he is a catcher, so we're saying everybody's not going to run on him like wild. Is his bat and just overall value to the team such that he is a starting catcher, a backup catcher, or the tweener kind of thing that most teams in the MLB are doing these days, where there's like a 60-40 split, something like that? If he is not being stolen against at the rate that he currently is, in which I just think that he's unplayable, but if he is not that, at least we figure out something to make it so that it's not ridiculous numbers that are being put up against us. I still would only say that he is a 40% backup type player. And the thing that makes that more valuable is, one, he is a player who didn't grow up as a catcher. He didn't really have a lot of like time to experience the wear and tear of being a catcher. Most of his wear and tear as a catcher has been at the major league level. And so it's not shocking to me that you put him in that wear and tear situation and suddenly his bat falls off, right? And so if you're getting a player who has never shown to be able to sustain a good bat over a full season and giving him fewer opportunities, it's at least conceivable to me that a healthy Nola who is not getting the wear and tear that the past couple of years Nola has been getting is better at the plate because he's just not worn down, right? And so that argument to me makes sense. If you say, he's a 30-40% player who his bat plays up when he's fresh and he has a good rapport with certain pitchers, that's a valuable player, I think, unless he's being stolen against by literally everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just, I agree with everything that you're saying. And just to kind of talk about the other side of the argument is that, what to do with that other, 60+% is, we got to play Campusano more. And I don't think that that's like obviously like breaking news, but I just want to go back to what the folks at Fangraphs were saying about his evaluation. With offensive first catchers, you have to take the long game, and you have to do that for a couple of reasons. One, like I said, he has to adjust to major league pitching. And two, just by virtue of the fact that he's playing the catching position, there's no way he's going to play 150 games. Even if he's a primary catcher, he's going to play 130 games tops, but the likeliest scenario is that, in a situation where Luis Campusano is the Padres' primary catcher, he's catching anywhere from like 90 to 105 games or something like that. So it's just going to take time for that bat to develop, and that bat is what makes him valuable. So, it actually can be argued that like Luis Campusano is the player that we thought we were getting in Austin Nola, which is a league average defender, but it makes up for it because of the offensive contribution that you're getting at the plate. Now, we haven't seen it yet, but I think it's kind of unfair to Luis Campusano, especially the way that like he's been shuttled back and forth over the last 3 seasons. I think he actually came up for the first time in 2020 during the COVID season for like a game or 2 games because he hit a home run in Oakland. I remember it was like his first major league home run.
To the opposite field.
To the opposite field, and we were
immediately
all like,
got
losing our
hurt.
minds. Yeah, exactly. And to think about that, this is actually the 4th season in which he's come up to the majors, and he hasn't accrued a year of service time. I mentioned this on the Padres Hot Tub show that happened this week, but I'm always fascinated by the more sentimental side of things, and I feel like there's a real big kinship that Bob Melvin feels towards Austin Nola, as Bob Melvin, who was a career backup catcher, or secondary catcher, whatever you want to say, who was not an offensive threat but called games well. And like basically everything you can say about Austin Nola, the pitchers love him. Like, he calls games, he handles situations, like whatever. What about those leadership intangibles, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you could say about Bob Melvin when he was a player and now as a manager. So, Austin Nola, by the way, I could totally see him as a future manager. You know what I mean? Like, it's the crossover there is really interesting. And I hope, I don't know if that's fair to Bob Melvin, who's multiple time manager of the year. And, I don't know that he gets that sentimental about things, but I think I'm just really surprised at the way that the Padres organization has treated Luis Campusano and shuttling him back and forth, which he's effectively like, if he's not their best prospect at this point, I mean, first of all, he's not a prospect anymore. Let's just say young player with less than a year of service time. He's the one who stands the chance to make the most impact on the major league team at this point. And most organizations tend to elevate those people because they're incredibly valuable, because they're potentially going to give you a lot of production for a very cheap rate. And for some reason, the Padres are seemingly refusing to do that because there either is disagreement between Bob Melvin and AJ Preller on what Austin Nola is, or there is alignment, and the alignment is a stubbornness to recognize that we're not getting the person that we thought we were getting in August of 2020 when we made that trade. So, John and I are in alignment. Play Campusano more. Figure out what Austin Nola is. Is he a major league catcher? I think it's a really good point that you brought up about, the most exciting thing about this year to me is we're going to figure out how valuable stolen bases are in the modern game now, because we don't know, people are stealing more, but we don't know yet if it's like actually correlated to more wins. That's something we're going to figure out at the end of the year. So, stay tuned. And I think whatever the decision is and whatever the numbers spit out is basically going to answer the question of if is Austin Nola a catcher or not anymore. So, anything to add, John, before we put a bow on this one?
No. Shout out Tevin. I bet he's writing down on the Discord right now as we speak, as he's listening to this. He is right. He is not a major league catcher. He is not. Like, get rid of him immediately. I feel like we gave him a little bit too much fuel for his anti-Nola fire.
Well, if you want to be a witness to that, you can join the Padres Hot Tub Patreon. Just as little as $5 a month, patreon.com/Padres Hot Tub. When this episode goes up, we will be on there, just engaging in one of the storied pastimes of being a Padres fan, arguing over who should play catcher. So we look forward to be a part of history and continue that long-spirited debate. And again, just as a reminder, we hope you watch this on YouTube. We've been obviously putting up all the data that we're referencing on this. And just a reminder to subscribe. That's really going to help us find more people. If you care about the show, if you like the content we're putting out there, I bet you there are other people who would love to see it too. And the number one way you can help us find them is by subscribing. And it's also where you will be able to find a poll for which pod above replacement we're going to cover next. So be sure to subscribe to our YouTube. You'll find the poll there. But that's it for now. So for John Precoda, I'm Raphie Cantor. Thank you again for listening to one of my favorite episodes so far, Pods Above Replacement. And we'll see you guys next time.